Hello, Dr. Grande here. I'm making this video on 11/5/2021. Today my channel hit 900,000 subscribers. Thank you so much. Every time this happens, I'm amazed, like I never expected. I know it might happen, but I'm just happy in the moment to have accomplished something like this, and I'm so happy that so many people find my videos to be interesting and enjoyable. So again, thank you so much. Today I'll be looking at my favorite comedians, but first I want to talk a little bit about humor and kind of my attitude toward it and why I incorporate it in videos. So for most of the videos I make, there are three major components in terms of what takes me the most time. First will be the analysis, like how I break down a particular true crime case or pop culture case or something like that in terms of how it fits in with science, our understanding of it, the mental health aspects, sometimes other aspects like the legal aspects or the cultural impact. So that's the analysis. That takes the most time. Then the timeline of whatever happened, like if it's a true crime case, all the events that actually occurred, like the significant details about like who committed what crime, what the witnesses saw, what the evidence was, things like that. The third item would be the humor. So for most videos, I try to inject some amount of humor. I can't always come up with it. A lot of times it just kind of comes to me as I'm writing the outline, right? So if it doesn't come to me, then there's not really much humor in the video, or none. But if it does, I'll put what comes to me in there up to a point. I usually try to have somewhere between like 2 and 4 comedic elements in any particular video. But again, sometimes I can't achieve that. Certain videos are just difficult to do that with because, like if it's a recent crime or something, it can be tricky to work that in, right? Like there's always a balance when it comes to humor. So sometimes people ask, why do I put the humor in at all? Like I don't need to. I could just stick with the analysis and the timeline. The videos would still be good. You know, why is it important to me to have the kind of comedic element in there? And there's a few reasons. My history with dark humor goes back for many years. As somebody who was disabled at an early age, I really connected with dark humor, and it was like a way to kind of laugh at all the bad things that happen. And at some level, I became interested in kind of like what's behind it, like studying it, and realized that it does have, dark humor specifically, does have a fairly strong relationship with intellectualism, like intellectual curiosity. So I think that it's a good match for videos that are designed to be intellectual and that appeal to an intellectually curious audience. So to me, it's highly congruent. It really fits in, and it kind of matches that eagerness for learning. Usually people are eager to learn something, especially technical and at a higher level. They also have that appreciation for a few different humor styles, including dark humor. I use other humor styles as well, like satire and wit, but the dark humor, I think, stands out, especially with the topics I cover. Like, again, I think it's congruent. Above and beyond that congruence, however, I think there is an educational value to humor because people learn in a number of different ways. And if you just kind of say things, just say, look, here's what happened, or here's my opinion, that's one level of teaching and hopefully would cause one level of learning. But when something's incorporated in a humorous anecdote or whatever, it takes on a different educational value. Sometimes people learn something in a different way or appreciate something in a different way when it's expressed through humor. So I think that, again, it's congruent with the overall purpose of the videos, right? To communicate something useful about these different situations I talk about. Beyond those 2 points, another reason I think that humor is important, not necessarily the humor that I bring, but I think that's a small part of it, but just in general, like the reason that humor is important across society is that lately we've seen kind of a rise of extreme beliefs. People become more polarized, and more people are on the extreme left and more people are on the extreme right. And When that happens, we see the rise of the cancel culture, mostly, of course, from the extreme left, but everybody really does it in a way. And the cancel culture is an anti-humor, anti-common sense, and anti-intellectualism type of a movement. It's dangerous. It threatens artistic expression. So in order to maintain a right, in order to value an art, the expression of that art has to continue. Like, it's good to practice. It's very easy to look at cancel culture and say, well, yeah, I'm just not going to do anything artistic. Other people will carry that weight. Other people will make sure that my freedoms are protected. I'd rather not take that chance, right? I like the humor. I think it has value. I'll talk a little bit when I get to the comedians about like how to balance that with offending people, but it's important. Humor is important. And in order to keep it right, you have to exercise it. And I think it's important just to challenge the cancel culture and all that nonsense, all those moral panic nonsense brokers, and just say, no, I'm not going to give up this right. And society shouldn't be okay with people giving up that right. So just like offering my opinion on cases and all that, it's freedom of speech, and it's important to exercise it. So it's larger than just entertainment and education. It's really about maintaining one of the more valuable aspects of artistic culture, because comedy is an art. It's just as valuable as painting and music and filmmaking and all that. It's of course valuable in a different way. All the arts are valuable in a different way. And I think that it's important to maintain it. I think it deserves to be treasured and preserved. So those are my thoughts kind of on the humor styles that I use, and really all humor. Even humor that I don't appreciate as much and I don't use, like I don't use slapstick or anything like that, I still appreciate those art forms. I think that's one of the key aspects of someone who attempts to be reasonable and logical, is to see artistic expression or anything, look at anything, and be able to appreciate it, even if it's not a preference, right? Like to look at a TV show or a song or a painting that isn't necessarily doing anything for you, and still be able to say, I can understand a lot of work went into that, and I can understand the meaning behind it. I don't like it, but I still appreciate it as an art form. Certain art forms really push that, right? Like certain expressions are very hard to understand, like modern art. You know, I struggle with modern art. A lot of it just looks like junk to me, right? Like it's just a piece of metal. That's not art. But art is flexible in that way, and that can mean something to somebody. I saw an article a while ago on, I think it was like a fraud, on a guy who was commissioned to do some modern art, and he just had the canvases blank. I don't know if it was modern art or something else, but he just submitted blank canvases and took the money. Seems more like fraud, but you know, somebody's going to argue, well, that's art. Another culturally significant component of humor is, and I've touched on this a little bit before with the extreme politics, is it kind of measures the health of a population in terms of like critical thinking skills and ability to make good decisions. So as people move out to the extreme left and the extreme right politically, they lose their appreciation for humor, and therefore we can see how humor does, you know, like how people respond, and kind of know what percent of the population is in trouble in terms of critical thinking. Because again, anti-humor is anti-intellectualism, and that has never worked out historically. So yes, I think there are many reasons that humor is important, and I think it's something that is incorporated, can be incorporated very well into a product that's not primarily humorous, right? We see many movies that aren't really like comedies, but there's a humor component. Just like sometimes there's paintings in the movie or sculptures or some other form of art. So I look at humor as something that can be added in and bring a little extra value to what I do. So those are my thoughts on it. There's a video I made some time ago specifically about humor styles that talked about like wit, satire, dark humor, and other types of humor as well. So it's going back a ways, probably a year or 2 years ago. I don't know. It was a ways back. Sometimes when I look at these pop culture and other kind of cultural topics, and contemplate the cancel culture and its growth, how it's kind of spreading and becoming more and more toxic. I can't help but think that maybe someday humor will be essentially banned, right? Not like somebody's going to say that, like they're going to say I don't like humor, but it's going to happen because of people's behavior, right? Like it's going to be functionally banned. And maybe 100 years from now, people will be in like some type of dystopian future. People will be hiding away watching videos of this time when people still had a sense of humor and expressed humor. Like they'll be hiding from the authorities, the armed thugs that are out there trying to enforce this cancel culture society that emerges. I don't think that'll happen, but it's something that occurs to me once in a while, that maybe there's a historical significance to humor that will be appreciated many years later when it's gone. Now moving to the next part of this video, looking at my 10 favorite comedians. So the word favorite is tricky here because I'm not talking about just one thing. There's a lot that I factor in when I'm trying to determine a favorite comedian. If it was just like enjoyment value, that would be a lot different than what I use in terms of how I'm defining favorite for this video. So favorite can be cultural significance, raw talent, the role that comedian played during the time when they were active, again, like in the culture, like changes they made, originality, a lot of factors go into it. So it's not just strictly who I think is the funniest, although I think all of these comedians that I'll be talking about are fairly funny. It's more about kind of like different characteristics that struck me as important and significant. So I guess one could say favorite/important, something like that. I didn't put these comedians or comedic actors in any specific order, although I generally tried to get them in order to where like the last few would be my favorites. Like I sorted that, but it was just so tough for me to decide like the actual order of them because, again, of the multiple factors involved, kind of loading onto that construct of favorite, that I just kind of went with an order that I developed, and I'm like, okay, I'm just going to stick with this because I'm not going to be able to really get them in any better order. So generally from ones I like to ones I'd like even more. That's how the list is sort of ordered. So the first comedian, this is one I covered on a prior video. Several of these comedians I covered on prior videos. The first comedian would be Sam Kinison. So Sam Kinison was very well known for his screaming thing, which isn't really my comedy style, but again, I can still appreciate it. He was very different. I think he was highly original, and I like that, but I also kind of like his story. Sam Kinison wasn't really a smart guy. He didn't have a lot going for him in the area of personality either. He was very sensation-seeking and used a lot of drugs. He's not somebody that you would typically think of as having a great chance of kind of wider success, like building a broad audience. But he was able to do it. He was able to take the personality that he had and work it into a comedic routine. And he worked hard on it. He refined it over many years and developed something that was funny to a fairly good-sized audience. I have to admire Sam Kinison's work ethic and the fact that he had repeated failures but didn't give up. Now, in the end, of course, his career was really in trouble not long before his death. He was not doing well. He wasn't connecting as well to humor. I think his career was pretty much over when he died in an automobile accident. He was driving and somebody came into his lane and hit him head on. Sam wasn't wearing a seatbelt, or he would have almost certainly survived. But yeah, he was definitely not doing well. The prime had already passed, but he did something pretty incredible considering what appears to be kind of a low level of natural talent for comedy. He just saw the world of comedy and said, I can do this. It doesn't really matter if I'm not really cut out for it. And he made a place for himself in comedic history. Most people wouldn't consider him a top comedian. I mean, I wouldn't either. But this is kind of where, like I talked about the word favorite, has a lot of factors as I'm using it here. The next comedian on my list is Norm MacDonald. He died not that long ago. He was on Saturday Night Live for several seasons. He was eventually fired. It was kind of him standing up for the art of comedy in a way, like for his expression of comedy. And I admired that. He went on to have a decent career, but he never really quite recovered and never really made it into the super big time. But he was very well known. I mean, a very popular comedian. I think what I like about him the most was him standing up for the art form. But I also liked kind of how his dry style could save even jokes that weren't that funny. Like he could take a ordinary joke and make it funny just through his delivery alone. In a sense, this made him quite versatile. So he didn't necessarily need good jokes. Often he did have good jokes, but he didn't need them. He had the talent, and he had developed kind of the persona that was capable of kind of carrying a show without, again, kind of a strong humor base to build off of. Also on Weekend Update, which I think was his skit on SNL, he really just took that to another level. Like he really made that his own, and I think was highly influential in terms of the way he could kind of read the news and point out the absurdity. That was really his talent, to point out the absurdity without having to be dramatic or giggling or kind of acting in some unusual way. Just very straight and calm, and he really made it work, I think, much better than a lot of antics. Norm MacDonald was also very committed to the art form, not just in terms of his own expression, but in terms of his respect for other comedians. He really understood what it meant to be a comedian, and he lived that lifestyle. So that was really where he was kind of dedicated. Just amazing commitment. The next comedian on my list would be Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle's humor is, well, it's in the news right now. It's controversial with his last show. It was always really controversial. It's not really necessarily my style, but I appreciate how he kind of stood up for the art form. And this gets into the area of kind of like, is it okay to offend people with humor? Many comedians don't want to offend people, but they also want to tell the stories. They also want to make the jokes. And it can become a very difficult balance. Dave Chappelle kind of took things, I think, a little bit more to the extreme, kind of pushing the limits. But that is important. That is an artistic expression that he's allowed to do. And I think that it gets into an area really of values. I don't think science can answer the question about who's right and wrong. Like in the case of Dave Chappelle specifically, he offended the transgender community. So some people are kind of on their side, other people on the side of Dave Chappelle. But logic can't answer that. One side isn't right or wrong based on logic. This is a situation of values. And I think that, of course, we don't want people offended in society, but at the same time, like with the case of comedy, what's the alternative? Not having comedians talk about anybody? Like not using any type of insults or anything like that as part of humor? That would be like asking a painter to stop using the color red or blue. I mean, they could still paint, but that would really be deprecating the art form. So again, it's a tough situation. It's a matter of values. Society has to decide where those lines are to be drawn. But I like Dave Chappelle in the sense that he takes chances. I don't necessarily specifically like the closer, his last comedy special that caused all the problems. Mostly because I didn't think it was really as funny as the other work that he did. But again, I do appreciate that he pushes the limits. I mean, he's using comedy as it was intended, not only for humor, but to shine a light on various cultural issues. I don't think it's a matter of he has the right to do it or not, as much as it is it causes a dialogue. The focus has become Dave Chappelle, like canceling him, but really it should be about the dialogue that his humor has created. Like that's the value of the art form, one of the values. So it should really be starting a conversation and advancing a conversation, but instead, in kind of the anti-intellectual cancel culture, it gets bogged down in, oh, let's cancel Dave Chappelle and all this stuff. doesn't really make any sense. It's not about stopping artistic expression. So I think it's kind of a simplistic and intellectually lazy way to look at this particular situation with Dave Chappelle. The problem with giving in to cancel culture, well, in any situation, but specifically in this situation, is where do we draw the line? Do we start then taking down paintings and eradicating music and putting movies on the shelf and not playing them? What art form and what type of an art form is safe if a group can simply say, I'm offended, whether they're legitimately offended or not, just that power to say, well, I'm offended, therefore artistic expression now has to be eliminated? That seems like a very flimsy base on which to build a massive change in tradition. Now, over time, of course, art forms evolve, and like I said, someday maybe humor will be gone. I don't think that's a good thing. But just to all of a sudden say, let's make a major cultural shift based on a few offensive comments that, again, were incorporated into a comedic routine, just seems to be unreasonable. So it's an interesting debate, and I think, again, that is the point. Whether somebody likes Dave Chappelle or not, he caused a debate, and I think that's a good thing. I think when people get entrenched in positions and can no longer talk about these issues, that's where the problem becomes out of control. That's a very bad sign. If people are still in a dialogue, then there's hope to find common ground or just to accept the way things are, like to accept that sometimes certain statements are going to be offensive and certain ideas are going to be offensive. To other people, they're not offensive. It's just a matter of preference. Again, as I said, a matter of values. So Dave Chappelle has made a significant contribution through, again, kind of pushing the limits of humor and creating that discussion. Now, of course, there has to be a limit to how offensive any art form can be and how kind of repeatedly offensive it can be. Like if Dave Chappelle made every show, like if he went on and made a bunch of shows and every show was about that same topic and he just kept hitting that topic over and over, that would be a lot different than just a few times trying to cause a discussion. I'm not really sure what his motive was for that special. I think that, again, he kind of pushed the limit, and that's not necessarily bad. But in the case of Dave Chappelle, I think he was, this is just my opinion, I think he was actually offended at being falsely accused of being against certain communities, and he wanted to drive that point home. But still, that is incorporated in the art form. Like, he's allowed to take his personal feelings and put that into comedy. So I know it's a touchy subject, and again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's something that everybody has to figure out on their own. I don't think that eradicating humor or any art form is the answer, though. I don't think that's a good direction as far as encouraging people to kind of work through problems and not just kind of run to one camp and say, I'm in this camp, I'm not going to move. Right? That's usually not too helpful. I find it interesting that two comedians, Jay Leno and Dan Aykroyd, have actually come down the side of cancel culture, suggesting that this is signaling a new age in comedy where anything offensive should be eliminated. So again, there will always be a variety of opinions, even from people in that business. So I disagree with Leno and Aykroyd on that point. Again, I think that's totally the wrong direction to move, but they're entitled to their opinion. Moving to the next comedian, I selected Robin Williams. So Robin Williams, of course, very energetic, unpredictable, enthusiastic. You really never knew what he was going to do, like on a stage performance, and even in his comedic acting. I feel like he made much more of a contribution through acting. He was in a number of really well-known movies like Good Will Hunting. And I think that he brought something, again, kind of that energy level and that randomness that made watching him fun. Like, he was just very gifted at making people laugh. And he could do that even when the jokes weren't too funny. So in a way, kind of like a totally different version of Norm Macdonald. Norm Macdonald had a delivery that could make unfunny jokes funny by being calm. Robin Williams had a delivery through being excited that could achieve the same goal. So he was really a master at comedic acting. And in my opinion, just, again, one of the best all-around comedians. One of my favorites in just about every sense of the word, right? Not just his cultural contribution, but just in his talent and how funny he actually was. In addition to being a very funny comedian, Robin Williams was also a pretty good dramatic actor. That gets overlooked sometimes. He was really quite gifted. Like many comedians, like Sam Kinison I talked about, Robin Williams did get involved in drugs. This might have been part of the sensation seeking, like no high was high enough. When life started to feel ordinary, or if he got down, he went to drugs. And I think it negatively affected his performance. Even with that, though, he was able to have a great career. The next comedian on my list is Eddie Murphy. Eddie Murphy really saved Saturday Night Live. He was there from 1980 to 1984. And there's stories about when he was on set, when he was new on the cast of SNL, how it was not a good time for the show. It wasn't really clear that it was going to survive. So the writers started writing for Eddie Murphy, right? They're like, well, let's give this kid a chance. I think he was like 19 or something at the time when he started there. And of course, he's incredibly funny and has very impressive comedic range, just totally fearless. He had, I think, a good time in stand-up early career, like in the 80s, and then it kind of went downhill, but he's kind of made it up with comedic acting, Coming to America being one of his most famous and best films. Eddie Murphy also pushed the limits and attracted some negative attention. I find it interesting that Bill Cosby actually criticized him, telling him to rein it in, right, that he was too out there with his comedy. But yeah, Eddie Murphy's a legend, I think, all the way around. Again, not just a great cultural impact, but truly just a very good comedian in his prime, and now a good comedic actor. I don't know if he's ever going to go back to stand-up. The next comedian on my list is Jerry Seinfeld. Jerry Seinfeld, of course, best known for observational humor. The show Seinfeld that was very well received. It's still watched quite a bit. Had kind of a theme of being about nothing, kind of exploring the humor of the mundane. And I think it did it better than almost any show ever has for that specific type of humor. I think at another level, I like Seinfeld because he respects the profession, like many of the comedians in this list. He understands what the profession's like, the downside. He's talked before about his early days in New York City and getting heckled and all the problems of being a comedian. So I think he really respects what it takes. And he's also made some of the most insightful statements about how a comedian reaches success. Like he's talked about how they often have to refine their acts over the course of years just to get a few minutes, just to get a set. And this kind of connects back with Sam Kinison, who again spent several years just trying to get 5, 10, or 15 minutes together of material that was funny enough to be at like the professional level, at a significant level where he could really accomplish the higher level goals. My next comedian would be Rodney Dangerfield. I have a video about Rodney that I made some time ago. Around the same time I made the Sam Kinison video. Rodney is an interesting comedian because he had a completely different occupation for many years and he switched into comedy. And one of his great regrets was that he didn't start comedy earlier. So it's just an unusual path. Most comedians start pretty young. He was also the master of self-deprecating one-liners. And I think what I really like about Rodney Dangerfield is he made the comedy look very easy, but he actually worked very hard on those lines, refining them over and over, writing them down on pieces of paper, going over them, and making sure they were perfect. So he made it sound like it was just off the cuff and he didn't really think about it, but he really did. And he was really a great joke writer and his delivery was absolutely splendid. And I think there'll really never be another comedian like Rodney Dangerfield. He was special in so many ways. The next comedian would be Stephen Wright. So Stephen Wright is the minimalist king of comedy. He delivers a series of one-liners that are unrelated to each other. Like, it's not like they connect back to a theme or anything like a story. Just these bizarre, odd, and unusual one-liners that are really catchy and non sequitur. Like, very funny, and it must take so much effort to write those, right? So he's burning through really good material very quickly, and it's very hard to create that material. I think sometimes the storyteller comedians have it a little easier in that sense. Like, they don't have to work as hard for the same amount of minutes of show. Whereas Stephen Wright really had to work because he had that concentrated material. I think he delivered in kind of a slow manner, which stretched out a little bit, but it was also very funny, so he had to leave a lot of time in between for people to laugh. And he had that pretty good. His timing was very good. So Stephen, I think, did a few other things. Like, I think he had some roles maybe in movies and TV, but he was primarily a comedian, unlike a lot of the people I'm talking about who really made a good living in a few different areas, like Seinfeld on TV and Eddie Murphy in the movies. The phrase I often think of with Stephen Wright is, brevity is the soul of wit. I think he really exemplifies that particular phrase. The next comedian on my list is George Carlin. So George Carlin's interesting because in his early career, he was very friendly to kind of a wider population of viewers. Like, he was suitable for kind of mainstream performances. Then he discovered drugs, like so many comedians do, and started to become much, much edgier, offending groups of people left and right. I mean, somebody like George Carlin, if we look at what happened to Dave Chappelle, somebody like George Carlin would not do well in this culture. So we already see a particular expression of comedy that would be eliminated in, say, the last 20 years. So, as I talked about, comedy may be on the way out, humor may be on the way out in general. And here's an example of somebody who performed in one way and could not probably get away with that today. I guess the same thing could be said for Sam Kinison and Eddie Murphy. Either way, I think that no matter where we look at George Carlin's career, his intelligence really shined through his comedy. One of the things I really liked about George Carlin was his mastery of the English language. He would kind of go through these sets and make it look easy, but he was really delivering kind of concentrated, complex phrases that he had thought through very carefully. And the way he could kind of rapidly move through them, like he didn't even acknowledge that they were funny. Like, he didn't laugh at his own jokes. He would just go through, and it was marvelous. Like, when he was on a roll, George Carlin, I think, one could argue, was really one of the funniest people who ever lived. Like, in his best sets, in his prime, he was hysterical. He very much so appealed to an intelligent audience and an intellectually curious audience. So I think just, again, overall great comedian, and some of his work is just something that many comedians admire. He inspired a number of comedians throughout his career. The comedian I selected for the top position in my list is Bob Newhart. Bob Newhart is best known for The Bob Newhart Show and Newhart, right? So I think The Bob Newhart Show was in the 70s, and I think that Newhart ran from 82 to 90. He did many other things as well. He was on The Big Bang Theory not that long ago as Professor Proton, I think was his character. And I think he came back as like a ghost or something. He did a lot there. But he is a master of deadpan and has kind of a stammering style that looks informal and kind of authentic, but it's clearly something he plans very well and carefully executes. It's just unique. There's really nobody like Bob Newhart, and he had an incredible career, especially in the area of television. I remember some time ago I was going back through old SNL episodes, because I think it's on Hulu where they have many of the seasons. And I think it was sometime in 1980, whatever season that was of SNL, where Bob Newhart was the host. So I watched his set on there, and the show was much different back then. The intro was longer, I guess, at least that one was. And it was kind of a storytelling thing that he did where he was talking about, I think it was some scientist who was exploring something. Like, I forget what the character was, but he was kind of telling the story. And it was really funny, and it was also just very well planned and executed. So just a great style and really easy, I think, to appreciate. I think that there's just a lot of people, a wide range of people, that can find Bob Newhart humorous for a wide range of reasons. So he doesn't have kind of a limited appeal. I think he has broad appeal. And I really think you have to have broad appeal to be successful in mainstream television shows like he was. So those are my favorite comedians, my list of 10 favorites. As I said, I tried to maintain an appreciation of humor and a number of other art forms. Comedy has always been an area that's been very interesting to me, and I think it's very valuable. And I feel like these 10 people, these 10 comedians / comedic actors, have made contributions that make them important at a cultural level. And of course, I think most of them were quite funny. I want to thank you once again for helping me to reach 900,000 subscribers. I've had a few people ask me about the 1 million milestone. I have dedicated some time thinking about a 1 million subscriber video because I know that is a significant milestone. I haven't really decided yet. One idea was to kind of go through profound lessons in my videos and kind of review a few of them, like mental health lessons or just kind of common sense lessons that I've talked about, that have come to light as I've analyzed various cases. How to deal with people with extreme personalities, how to be successful, how to be satisfied or happy, like kind of more general themes, but highly specific instances and videos where I've talked about that, kind of like pull those out and maybe kind of list them and talk about them a little. That's one idea. Something that kind of pulls together every video, something that's a commonality that's shared between all my videos. Like the humor element, like I discussed this time, that's not in every single video. And a lot of elements aren't in every single video. But the lessons learned are always there, even if I don't have a lessons learned section in every one, right? There's lessons that people can pull out through a variety of the formats that I've used over the years. So that's one idea. I think that's kind of the leading idea right now. But I just wanted to throw that out there as a possibility. Again, I realize that's kind of a major milestone. I did want something that, a thread that kind of ran through all the work I've done on YouTube, right, that runs through all the videos. So that's where I'll wrap up today's video. I hope you enjoyed me describing humor and what it means to me, and kind of listing and describing the various comedians that had an impact on me and that I appreciate for what they have done. Again, thank you so much for 900,000 subscribers. It is truly my honor and privilege to do this work, to get on here every day and make these videos and kind of tackle all these various issues in the best way that I know how, right? I work hard. I do my best. I'm glad that has had a positive impact. Thank you so much for your support, and I will talk to you soon.